This is the IBJ podcast for the week of May 2nd, 2022, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Our story begins in 1902 with the opening of West Baden Hotel in southern Indiana, a structure so immense and architecturally dramatic that it was nicknamed the Eighth Wonder of the World. After passing through its lavish and cleverly designed grounds, visitors would enter the 700-room hotel and discover its most dramatic feature, a free-spanning dome that was 135 feet high and 208 feet in diameter. Another major draw, the natural mineral springs nearby, which were believed to have medicinal properties. And so the hotel became a popular draw for America's growing upper class, with politicians, industrialists, gangsters, and movie stars all making cross-country jaunts to the hotel to rub elbows in that atrium. So it's fitting that the hotel has become a movie star in its own right, just 120 some years after its public debut. It's the prominently featured setting of the new movie, So Cold the River, filmed entirely on location. It's based on the novel of the same name by best-selling author Michael Koryta, a Bloomington native. He was inspired to write the supernatural thriller featuring the hotel after it received a near-miraculous, top-to-bottom renovation from Indiana preservationist Bill Cook and his wife Gayle. Cook amassed a huge fortune as founder of Bloomington-based Cook Group, which manufactures medical devices. Bill and Gayle spent more than $500 million renovating the hotel and its sibling property, the French Lick Springs Hotel. And today they are known collectively as the French Lick Resort. I will happily wager that anyone who enters that atrium immediately thinks, wow, somebody should make a movie here. And that is the subject of today's podcast. Although there's a bigger story here. Koryta pitched the movie idea to Pete Yonkman, president of Cook Group. Yonkman thought it would be a natural fit for Pigasus Pictures, a Bloomington-based movie studio that is dedicated to making films in Indiana with as much Indiana-based talent as possible. Yonkman and Cook Group CEO Carl Cook personally invested in the movie, which had a very modest budget, less than $2 million. But the team was able to save a ton of money because Cook Group owns the resort and supplied critical support to facilitate production of the movie. And as we'll discuss, the state could be on the brink of a renaissance in its filmmaking and media production industry with the institution this summer of significant tax credits for Indiana-based productions. It might not be a stretch to suggest that we'll be seeing a lot more movie stars in Indiana in the not-too-distant future. So my guests are Pete Yonkman of Cook Group and Zack Spicer, CEO of Pigasus Pictures. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Zack Spicer, founder and CEO of Bloomington-based Pigasus Pictures. Did I get that right, Pigasus?
That's Pigasus. Pigs with wings.
Thanks for making time, Zack.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And I'd like to welcome back to the podcast Pete Yonkman, president of Bloomington-based Cook Group, Inc. Pete, it is great to talk to you again.
Yeah, nice to be back.
Now, this is going to be a little bit inside baseball, but before we get going, I feel like I need to address this. This is the 200th episode of the IBJ podcast. This is the third time Pete Yonkman has been a guest on the podcast. For anybody that's paying attention, yes, that does tie our record for somebody who is not a regular contributor like Pete the Planner to IBJ. But here's what is really interesting. While Cook Group certainly is one of Indiana's most significant corporations, each of Pete's appearances has been to discuss an extraordinary project that you would not normally or necessarily consider within the scope of a privately held manufacturer of medical devices. We have talked about Cook creating a manufacturing plant on the east side of Indianapolis, specifically to create jobs for nearby residents and support them with wraparound services. We've discussed Cook's role in creating and managing the organization Hoosiers for Good, which helps connect Indiana University athletes with not-for-profits that they can then represent and promote. Now Cook Group is in the movie production business. Pete, can you just briefly, before we get going here, speak to the corporate philosophy behind this? I mean, a lot of companies do a great job of helping support their communities, but this is not the same thing as writing a check
to the United Way. Cook is involved in so many projects that frankly take a lot of time, a lot of planning, a lot of man hours, and a lot of creativity. Why is it that the Cook distinguishes itself that way?
Great question. And I think the answer is kind of simple. It sounds like it's, sort of this grand plan. I don't think, if you look at what you mentioned, movies, grocery stores, other projects, not in some grand design. What it really is we really believe that we have all these great people that work for Cook, and we have these great resources and skills. And so if you can use those in a way that is right, good for business, but also good for the community, those things lead you in a lot of different places. You find yourself in different areas, but if you have that core belief that your company can do more than just do business, but you can also use those opportunities in interesting ways, you find yourself in some interesting meetings along the way.
And is it just that you are receptive to some of the more left field ideas that come at you, or do you brainstorm at night thinking, well, this would be cool?
It really is more about the partnerships and the people we meet, right? So if you look at, and you'll know, here's Zach's story, but this is one of those situations where sometimes the planets align and the universe says, hey, dummy, you need to do this. Pigasus Pictures is trying to do something very special in our hometown. They're trying to build a movie company in the middle of Indiana, right? Nobody's doing that. And they're trying to do it in a way that's community minded, that gives back, creates job opportunities. We have Michael Koryta, who's the author of this great book that the movie is based on, lives in Bloomington, is passionate about the history of these hotels. And then Cook has the hotels and spent all this time working on it. It's almost like, how do you not do that movie, right? It just is there in your lap. You got to do it.
So let me back up just a little bit. So the story begins with the novel, So-Called the River. It's written by Bloomington native, and he still lives in Bloomington. Is that right?
He does, yeah.
Koryta? Wow.
Yep.
New York Times best-selling author. The novel is inspired by the West Baden Springs Hotel, which is located in the French Lick area. I can attest, really anybody can attest who's been in that building. The first thing that you say to yourself is, man, this would be a great place to film a movie. It is one of the most awesome historic structures probably in the country. Can you give us, Pete, just a quick history about the hotel and then its restoration by Bill and Gayle Cook, the founders of Cook Group?
So I don't know that everybody knows this, but Bill and Gayle are tremendous historians. Aside from all the other things they've done, they're these tremendous historians, and they were involved in historic preservation back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And they wrote a book called I'm not blanking the name of the book, but it was a guide to Southern Indiana. And each year they would publish this book about all the really cool places in Southern Indiana. And they stumbled upon French Lick and West Baden. And at that time in the 80s, it was truly in disrepair. The spires were falling down. It was crumbling. And these, if you've been there, these are historic structures that have to be saved. And so they got involved in the 80s, just starting to just build the foundation back, start to put some of the walls in place. And it expanded through there over time. And again, it goes back to this philosophy of, they realized if we're going to make these things successful and the community successful, it has to all go together. So they thought, wow, if we could restore this, not just to make it a museum, but an opportunity to provide 1,800 jobs for the community, what a cool thing that would be. So that's, again, it's just sort of that organic, follow your nose and see where it takes you.
Now, Zach, my understanding is that the Michael Koryta used the hotel as the inspiration for the book, So-Called the River. Can you, for the readers, just give us a quick synopsis of the story and also explain what role the hotel plays?
Well, that's what's so unique about the film and the book itself. I mean, the hotel is the centerpiece of the entire story. And it was something kind of cool that, what brought the hotel there and what starts the novel and what begins the film is all of the water. For those of you that have been down to French Lick and West Baden, the area down there became famous because of the unique spring water that flows under everything down there. And so that is, the water is what brings our lead character in the film, Erica Shaw. The water comes to her up in Chicago through another character, and she makes the decision to follow this water back down to French Lick, West Baden, and uncover the story of what the water holds down there at the hotels. And so it's an interesting blend of some of the true things that happens in the creation of the hotels and everything there. And what Michael does is he imbues the story with as much local character and rich history that really gives the entire story a solid sense of place. And that was what was so important to the novel and to the film. And then be able to bring like these psychological thriller horror elements to it throughout that carry the story. For just to cover bases, for those of the listeners that are huge fans of the novel, as are we, the movie is very different from the novel. The novel is about 500 pages long. And in order to do a play-by-play recreation of what Michael so perfectly put down in the novel, we would need about 3 years of filming, like a mini series that takes place down there. But Paul Schoberg, the writer-director who lives in Nashville, Indiana, another IU grad, took Michael's novel and was able to condense down like the specific themes that come across, which is specifically like, where do you find yourself on the other side of ambition? We're all led by ambition in one way or another. And what decisions are made that ticks that level of ambition just one or two steps past what is healthy decision making. And I think he just did an excellent job of bringing that out in the film itself. Yeah.
So I think one of the things I think is really interesting you mentioned, Zach, is that this is an important movie as a movie, but it's important for the history of the town and the people. These hotels have been around for 120 years now. They've been through wars, they've been through depressions, they've been through pandemics twice, and they've been through good times and bad times. It's really the people of the community that have kept these things alive. And I think that kind of comes out in the movie and the book. So that's another part of it that I found really intriguing, was it sort of as a testament and pays homage to the work that these folks have done for more than 120 years now.
So there was an actual conversation between you, Pete, and Michael Koryta where he pitched that to you. Is that right?
Yeah. I was sitting in a leather chair somewhere. And no, I've known Michael for a long time. And I've known this book was there. I remember the first time I met Michael was actually at a lunch with Bill Cook and Michael Koryta, because Bill wanted to meet him because he written this tremendous book about the hotels, and Bill wanted to meet him. And there was a time when Bill actually tried to obtain the movie rights to this picture years ago. And it was already taken up, as actually some movie studio had it and was trying to do something else with it. So those movie rights came back available. And that's why I said the stars sometime just align. I'd gotten to know Zach and the team there, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And I also trusted the folks involved, right? I trusted Zach and his team and Michael and Paul. They also understood that this is not just a movie. This is about something more. It's about the people and the place. And as Zach said, I think when you watch it, you get the sense of it's not just a horror movie. It's talking about something bigger.
Now, Zach, speaking of ambition, give us a little bit of backstory on Pigasus Pictures.
So we started Pigasus 6 years ago, came back to Bloomington, made our very first feature, The Good Catholic, and Danny Glover and John C. McGinley. It went off, won a bunch of film festivals, and we ended up selling it at the time to Netflix, and then sold it to Amazon Prime. I think it's on Amazon Prime now. Seeing the community come rally around that film, because again, this was another example of, we were telling a story, and we were the first ones for a really long time of attempting to make a movie there in Indiana. An entire community came up and supported that ambition and that vision. And so community has been the bedrock of everything that we've done at Pigasus ever since. And we've been fortunate enough now, we've made 6 feature films in the state, 4 of which have now gone on to distribution and winning various festivals across the world and everything. Indiana just passed this legislation of being able to have a film tax incentive, which we're ecstatic about, because a lot of stories aren't being told from this area of the country. And I think one of the coolest things that we've been able to do is every single one of our films has gone into a different town all across Indiana. And we've been able to shed light and highlight some of these local stories and the local creatives that are all across the state, giving them opportunity to be engaged in the art form so that they don't have to leave, so they don't have to go to New York or Los Angeles or Atlanta. Yeah.
I would add to what Zach Zach brought up another important point. We talked about this ecosystem of creating film. And I think it really is important that Indiana pass this incentive. And I hope it expands, because it's not just about creating film. It's about creating people who have an understanding of how to create content and how to develop content. If you think about the future of business, I don't care what business you're in, there is a need for content. There's an insatiable need for content these days. And I think if Indiana gets left behind in the content creation world, we're going to have a problem. And as local businesses, we need content creators. We struggle to find people who can meet our needs, just from a marketing needs or content creation. We don't want to go out of state. We want to stay in state. And so what's happening is those film opportunities are creating this ecosystem of people who learn how to do editing. They learn how to do lighting design. They know how to do set design. Those are things we desperately need as an economy in our state. So I'm really excited about where it's going. And the other thing is that Zach and those guys are doing it the right way. They're not just flying in a bunch of people, making a movie and leaving. These are all Hoosiers who are making these really cool films.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 625 attorneys across 11 offices, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast and our conversation with Zack Spicer and Pete Yonkman about the new movie So Cold the River.
Now, if you look at the poster for this movie, or if there is an online poster, Pete Yonkman and Cook Group CEO Carl Cook are among the executive producers. What does that mean, being an executive producer?
It means we told them how to do everything. We call all the shots. No, what that really means is we helped facilitate getting the connections made. We helped make sure the resources were there. It was also important to Carl, I know, because of his family's history in that building. He wanted to make sure that the story was told in a way that was respectful of the people in the community. So it was really more facilitation than anything.
Right. Yeah. And Carl is the son of Bill and Gayle
Cook. Yeah.
Bill Cook. And he's the CEO of Cook Group.
Correct.
Okay. I know we don't like talk about money here in Indiana, but financially, how much support did Cook and or you and Carl provide for this movie?
Well, we were a very low budget film. When you look at this movie, one of the things I think is the group should be most proud of is it feels like a real movie. And a lot of that is a credit to the hotels, right? You film in a place like that, it feels big, it feels expansive. And so to have that set, we could have never done on the budget that we did it for without having that hotel. So,
yeah.
I don't know if we talk about the numbers exactly, but it would say it's a very low budget film in terms of what most films are.
Okay. How much was the budget?
Well, I don't know. Zach, have you talked about that? We've talked about it before, haven't we?
Not in public, but it's your EP, so you get to decide.
It was. Let me say it was less than what some of the houses are going for in Indianapolis these days. Let's say that.
Holy mackerel! Okay, less than $2 million.
Yeah.
Okay, and is it at least fair to say that the Cook Group had a significant contribution?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was. So, right, you're talking about we contributed to it for sure. And we had individual investors as well. So Cook Group, one of the things that we did, one of the things that the hotels did, which is amazing, is, during the winter months, it can get slow just because it's, in the February, we shot in February of that year, right before the pandemic hit, finished right as everything was closing down. But it's kind of a slower time for the hotel. So they were nice enough to say, we're just going to shut this thing down for a period so that you can really film in this thing. And so you can imagine there's a lot of contribution that comes that way, but it was really a family affair. I mean, you had the Pigasus team living down there. You had the actors living there. You had the hotel team living there. It was almost eerie because you walk in and this place is empty except for this amazing film being shot. So it was a very unique experience in the history of those hotels.
Yeah. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my entire life.
Okay, now why do you say that?
Well, I mean, like you said, we are the lone occupants of the West Baden Hotel, one of the most opulent and gorgeous places that you can imagine being. That it has all circular hallways, so every hallway looks exactly the same. We're shooting at night entirely, so we don't see the sun, And if you've been down to the West Baden, they have a music track that has about 13 songs that play in order over and over again. And pretty soon you feel like you are inside the psychological experiment rather than telling a story of it.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. Now my understanding, right? Cook Group technically owns the hotel.
We own the hotel. Yeah. It's
not
business.
as if they were like nice enough to let you film there. I mean, I think.
Well, sure. I mean, sure, we could say, but it does. I mean, you can't. So, like, yes, we could say we're going to shoot this hotel, we're going to close down, but it also requires a lot of people, right? And a lot of people changing their schedules and getting out of their normal routine. So, yeah, there were a lot of people there, and there were people who, and Zach will tell you, making a movie inside of a hotel is a very different thing than servicing clients in a hotel. So they were having to learn along the way too. And so I mean it. And they put their lives on hold and did this for us. So it was great.
Okay. The movie could not have happened without the entire staff down there at the hotels. Essentially, we at Pigasus, we operate a bare bones skeleton crews as little as we possibly can to make sure that everything works efficiently. But essentially, we had tripled the size of our crew because of the number of people that were working down there for the hotels that were making the entire shoot and everything possible. I mean, these people were feeding us 3 meals a day. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Our day started at 6 p.m. and we finished at 6 a.m. So these people that are used to working like normal business hours, now the chefs and the waiters and everybody down there, now they're serving lunch at 2 a.m. And they did that for 5 weeks, so they were living through everything that we were living through. And again, like it couldn't have happened without them otherwise.
Now, as we mentioned, a lot of states try to encourage local filmmaking by giving tax breaks or other kinds of incentives to filmmakers. When you guys were making this movie, were there any incentives available from the state of Indiana?
No, at that point, we had been lobbying the state and we'd been talking and working with the Indiana Economic Development Council for different opportunities of how we could figure things out. But at that point, there were not any of them in place. And, that is a huge driver of when you talk about the business side of filmmaking, these states that border Indiana, if you can go to Illinois and film something in Illinois and have a 50% Illinois workforce, and you can get a guaranteed return of 30 to upwards to 40% of your investment, no financier is going to say, well, it's really important to film in Indiana. And that's what makes what Pete and Cook Group, what they did so special, is because they saw the value of what this industry actually could be and the unique opportunity of being able to tell this very local story. But it takes visionaries like that to see the landscape of the business before it actually lives there. So Cold the River will forever go down for me as we watch how the film tax incentive unfolds in Indiana. It'll forever go down for me as like one of the gutsiest, riskiest things that you could do, because this is, in comparison to our other films are very small. They're intimate. They're usually like 4 characters talking in a room, But what Pete and Carl did, they took a swing for something that could play in the same league as all of the other big films on Netflix and Amazon, all of that, and actually show what Indiana is capable of.
There's a bit of connective tissue here that I think I'm missing. So how did Pigasus get involved in this?
I mean, it first started hanging out with Pete. I mean, like, I met Pete on the set of our second film, is White Light. Pete came and took a tour of the storage warehouse that we asked politely if we could film inside the area that they weren't, putting couches and park loungers. And we were filming in there. Pete came and toured the little studio that we had built up inside there. And then it really was like sitting down with Pete and Michael and just hearing about what they wanted to do with the novel. And if it was possible, like in our, independent brain of resourcefulness, like, could we actually realistically make this movie ourselves? And at that point, that was us bringing on the writer director of the previous films, Paul Schoberg, and using his unique abilities of like driving a story through emotion and character and dialogue and the visual storytelling that he's capable of doing.
Now, earlier this year, Governor Holcomb signed into law a revision of the state's tax incentives program. So there now is, or that will, I think, in July 1st, there's available a film and media production tax credit offering as much as, I think, 30% for qualifying expenses. Zach, can you give me a clear idea of how that works? How does that save for production money?
Well, I think we're all excited to see how that's going to work. The IEDC is in the process of laying out what the exact parameters of that will be. And, my hope for that is that there are stipulations put in place that it needs to be a certain amount of Hoosier workers and a Hoosier workforce that is a part of each production. You see that in other examples of states in Illinois and Kentucky and Atlanta, where it's successful. And what that's going to do is, like I said before, that is a guaranteed return that you can give to your investors. Right off the bat, you're making a movie for $1 million, 300,000 plus is coming back. And that's a great incentive to be able to put all of that money to use. But the other thing that it's going to do is it is going to create the opportunity and the drive for more filmmaking jobs to be had within the state itself. And this is a really big key factor. Is we have Ball State cranking out all of these students that are working in the film and TV industry, and they're going to Chicago and Atlanta and New York and LA. And then Indiana University just started their BFA program in filmmaking specifically, and they opened up, and I don't want to get the number wrong, but it was like 130 some incoming freshmen that immediately signed up for this major. The desire there for these jobs is great. And the opportunity that we are now faced with of continuing to be able to make things locally in Indiana by Indiana companies and hiring local Indiana talent, we're talking about a massive industry that is just in the beginning stages. And you can take a look at other cities of Atlanta and Albuquerque and Toronto and Vancouver and all of these other places that billions of dollars a year in infrastructure and the surrounding businesses are built up.
How would you expect it to affect your company?
Well, we're already starting to see it. Is that we have created a history now of being able to make high quality stuff at a really independent, competitive level before the tax credit. And that's what we've been doing for the past 6 years. So for the past 5 or 6 years, it's been a lot of conversations about me trying to convince people to come to Indiana. And now the phone continues to ring of projects that want to come to Indiana from the coasts because they see the unique opportunity here. So it's a big switch, and we're in the midst of designing the opportunity for growth within Pigasus that kind of takes us to the next level of working within the industry. We talked about it for a while of like the beginning was knocking on the door of the industry. The middle has been working with the industry, and then part 3 is becoming the industry. So that's what we have our set on now.
Well, the movie was released in, I think, select theaters March 25th, then became available on demand on March 29th. We have a sense of how it is doing.
Well, it was it wasn't number 1, but it was in the top 10 top selling films on Apple TV for over a month, which was awesome. We get quarterly reports, so we won't know the final numbers of everything until month is it right now?
Sometime in April.
Almost May.
Yeah, sometime in April. Yeah. So in Q3, we'll start to get numbers coming in for it. But it was also extended theatrically past its original window. So we played in Indianapolis and a couple of other key markets for the better part of a month. So
that's saying something, because movies don't make it in films in theaters anymore. Theaters are unless you're Marvel, it's very hard to be in a theater. So at least in our area, we were excited about that. I think what's been really interesting, just I'll give you an anecdotal example of how this lives on. The room in which one of the key rooms of the characters in the hotel was designed in a very specific way. The hotels have kept that room, and people now are requesting that everybody wants to stay in that room, right? Because they've seen it. It's kind of, we actually had a guest check out in the middle of the night because they're like, it's just too creepy. So, it's that's kind of fun, right? It's just the fun stuff like that lives around something like a movie that doesn't exist anywhere else.
It is a distinctive room that already existed in the hotel.
Yeah, but it was redesigned completely for the movie.
Oh, okay.
And so they've kept it, looks exactly like it does in the movie now. So you can rent that room. As I said, one person just like, it's too much for me. I'm out.
Is it possible to rent that room and watch the movie like on your TV inside the room?
I think they're working on that right now.
Yeah,
I think they're working on getting the film available within the hotel structure itself. But you can bring your laptop. You can rent it. You can rent it on your laptop and play it in the film.
That would be great. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
My thanks again to Zack Spicer and Pete Yonkman. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are several stories in the latest print edition of IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, recent public comments by Eli Lilly and Company CEO Dave Ricks examining the state's shortcomings as a potential destination for new companies and investment have sparked conversation and debate across Indiana's business community. Reporters John Russell, Susan Orr, and Emily Ketterer asked business leaders to address the question of whether the state is doing enough to keep Indiana growing and what an effective strategy might look like. Also in this week's issue, Dave Lindquist dives into one of the most ambitious and revealing exhibits in the history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, Roadsters to Records, the 12 years that revolutionized the Indianapolis 500. And our political team has a preview of the most consequential races on primary election day. Again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or, of course, online at ibj.com. I will say it is quite a bit easier to access all of the latest local news about business and politics and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business, community, and economy if you're a subscriber. It works out to about $2 per week for actionable information you're not going to find anywhere else. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbenner. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.